The first blow of the hammer rang out across the church square like a gunshot. The people gathered in their Sunday clothes pressed closer, a hungry tide of whispers and glares. Sheriff Whitlock raised the plank high, the muscles in his thick neck cording with effort. He nailed it to the porch beam, each strike echoing off the whitewashed walls of the Lord's house. The word unclean blazed in thick black paint. The letters were jagged and dripping, as though carved in anger itself. The crowd gasped, some with hands clapped over their mouths in performative shock, others with smirks curling like smoke. Selina flinched when the sheriff shoved her beneath the sign. Her back scraped against the raw wood, sending splinters through her thin dress. She kept her eyes lowered, but they were not broken. Not yet. Her dress was plain, wrinkled from nights spent sleeping in corners where no one offered shelter. Mothers clutched their children tighter, hissing warnings that she was cursed, that to even brush her sleeve was to invite a fever that would rot you from the inside out. Fathers spat in the dust, muttering that the town was safer with her, branded than free. "They say she carries sickness," one woman whispered, her voice loud enough for Selina to hear. "No, it's worse," another replied, crossing herself as though to ward off a spirit. "They say she consorted with an outlaw, that her mother died raving, just like she will." The sheriff's voice boomed, thick with satisfaction, as he spread his arms to address his flock of vultures. "This woman will not sit in our pews. She will not eat at our tables. She will not share the same air as decent folk." He jabbed a meaty finger toward the board. "This is her mark, and she will wear it as long as she breathes." Laughter erupted from the edge of the crowd, where men leaned from the saloon doorway, mugs in hand, their voices cruel with drink. "Let's see how long she stands before she crawls," one jeered. Another spat. "Bet she won't last an hour." Selina's hands trembled, her nails biting into her palms. She gripped her fingers together until her knuckles whitened, forcing herself to stay upright, though a hot flush of humiliation climbed her cheeks, burning hotter than the noon sun. From inside the church came the sound of hymns, the pure voices of newlywed brides stinging her ears with a reminder of everything she was denied. A small boy, no older than 10, tugged at his father's coat. "Papa, what does it mean?" The man bent low, his voice hard as iron. "It means she is less than us." Those words struck deeper than the hammer, deeper than the sheriff's shove. Selina's breath caught in her throat, a knot of pain and fury. But she raised her head just enough that the black letters of the board cast a shadow across her brow. She would wear their judgment, but she would not bow to it. The sheriff stood back, arms crossed, proud of his work, as though justice itself had been nailed into that splintered wood. He sneered down at her. "Stand there, girl. Let the town see what you are." The hammer hung from his belt, but its echo seemed to still beat inside her skull. Every strike a curse, every echo a nail. A hush spread as the last church bell faded, the square now packed tight, every single gaze heavy with judgment. A voice broke the silence, sharp and eager from the back. "She won't last the night." The crowd shifted, a single beast hungry for a spectacle, and as Selina stood trembling beneath the word that condemned her, the people leaned closer, waiting for the moment her strength would finally shatter. The square stank of sweat, dust, and the kerosene from the lanterns burning at its edges. Into that hot, thick air poured the sound of laughter, sharp and merciless. A boy darted close enough to throw a pebble at Selina's feet. It bounced against her worn shoe with a soft thud, and the crowd roared, delighted at such bravery from one too small to be properly punished. "Go on, ghost girl," someone shouted. "Fall down so we can all go home." Another voice answered, thin and cruel. "Nay, let her stand. Let's watch her wither like a weed in the sun." The insults flew thicker than dust, each word a stone meant to grind her down until her knees buckled and she collapsed in the dirt. But Selina gripped her hands together tighter, fixing her gaze not on the hateful faces, but on the crooked wooden cross nailed above the church door. Her lips moved without sound, a prayer or a curse, no one could tell, and that very uncertainty unsettled some, who whispered that madness had already claimed her. A man spat a dark stream of tobacco juice into the dirt and sneered. "She shared a roof with fever once. Now she shares it with the devil." His wife tugged at his arm nervously, but his laugh was hard and ugly. A woman clutching a baby pressed closer, rocking her child as though shielding it from some invisible rot that radiated from Selena's skin. She hissed, "Don't breathe near us." Selena flinched. Shame rose hot in her chest, a poison she refused to swallow. Still, she stood. The sun dipped lower, stretching long, distorted shadows across the square. The crowd did not thin. Cruelty is a fire that draws folk in a way hymns never can. Young men started tossing coins in the dust at her feet, pretending to bid on how many hours she would last. Each metallic clang mocked her poverty. One silver coin rolled right to the toe of her boot. She froze. For a single heartbeat, hunger warred with pride. It would be so easy to stoop, to snatch it from the dirt. But she pressed her shoulders back, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her bend. A few gasps rose at her defiance, followed swiftly by more jeers. "Look at her pride," a woman shrieked. "Pride is uncleaner than sickness." The sheriff barked his agreement, his voice a whip. "Mark her well, folks. This is what happens to those who will not bow." His words sparked more laughter, but beneath it a new murmur stirred, faint and uneasy. Not all hearts in this town were entirely cruel, and some found themselves wondering just how long a girl could endure, while every tongue in town was used to cut her raw. Her knees shook, her hands trembled, but still she would not fall. A drunk staggered from the saloon, his mug spilling dark ale onto the dusty ground. He pointed a wavering finger at her. "Why just leave her standing? Strip the shawl from her shoulders. Let's see if pride still holds her up then." The crowd hooted, some cheering him on, some turning away. Selena's heart thudded so hard she thought her ribs might crack. She clutched the post of the sign behind her back, steadying herself, the rough wood biting into her skin. But the drunk lurched closer, his face a twisted mask of spite, his hands stretching toward her. The people leaned forward, a single greedy organism, desperate to see her defiance finally tested by a man's touch. The drunk's hand closed around Selena's arm. His fingers dug into her sleeve with a grip far stronger than his stagger suggested. The crowd erupted with a roar, half laughter and half disbelief that anyone would dare. Selena gasped, twisting to pull free, but his breath was a foul cloud of whiskey and rot. His face hovered so close she could see the broken veins in his cheeks, like a red spider web. "Let's see if the unclean bleeds like the rest of us," he slurred and jerked her forward. The people pressed closer still, their eyes hungry for the sight of her dignity being torn away. Children squealed, men cheered, women covered their mouths but didn't look away. Shame and spectacle were married in that square. Terror crawled up Selena's spine, cold and sharp. But beneath it, something else flickered, something stubborn and hot that refused to let this man drag her into the dust. She yanked hard, but his grip only tightened, bruising her thin flesh. He barked a laugh, raising his mug to the crowd as if in toast. "Look here. She's softer than she looks. Perhaps not so cursed after all." His words cut sharper than his grip. The crowd howled its approval, their cruelty swelling like a black floodwater. Selena thought she might drown in the noise. The sheriff made no move to stop it. He just stood there, arms folded, a wide smirk on his face. Her humiliation served his purpose far better than her silent suffering. "Unhand me," she choked out. Her voice cracked, but it was steady enough to cut through some of the jeers. A ripple of surprise flickered through the mob. They had not expected her to speak. The drunk's grin widened into a leer. "Or what? You'll curse me? Spit your sickness in my face?" He leaned closer, daring her. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She bit her lip until the taste of blood, sharp and coppery, filled her mouth. And with that taste came a surge of pure, unbridled fury. She shoved his chest with all the strength left in her. It barely rocked him, but it startled him enough that a lace sloshed down the front of his shirt. Gasps rose, quickly smothered by fresh laughter. But the tone had changed. It was no longer pure delight, but laced with a threat of unease. Her defiance wasn't breaking. It was growing. "She dares strike a man!" someone shouted. "Pride is uncleaner than filth!" another cried. The sheriff seized the moment, his voice booming over the noise. See? See how rebellion clings to the cursed? She is proof of her own guilt. The drunk raised his hand, his knuckles white, his eyes burning. He was going to slap her down right here, in front of everyone. Selena braced herself, her stomach a tight knot of dread. The crowd leaned in, whispering that the moment had finally come. But just as his palm swung through the air, another hand shot out from the fringe of the crowd. It caught his wrist mid-strike, halting it cold. The drunk's eyes bulged. The crowd fell silent. And for the first time that night, every single gaze shifted away from Selena. They fixed on the stranger, whose grip turned the blow aside with effortless strength. The drunk twisted, cursing, but his wrist remained locked in the iron grip of the man who had stepped from the shadows. His figure was tall and broad, his clothes rough from trail dust, his beard unshaven. His eyes glinted with the unnerving calm of someone who had faced storms fiercer than a mob's laughter. A ripple of recognition and fear went through the crowd. "A mountain man," someone murmured. "He's not from here." The sheriff's smirk faltered. He knew the breed. Loners who live beyond the town's laws, hardened by the wilderness, answerable to no man. The stranger's voice was low, yet it carried across the dead silent square. He released the drunk's wrist with a sharp shove that sent the man stumbling back into the dirt. "No man strikes a woman while I draw breath." The words cut through the night, sharper than any whip. The only sound was the crack of the drunk's mug shattering as it hit the ground. Selena, breathless, pressed her back against the porch post, her heart thundering. She couldn't believe it. Someone had spoken for her. But the stranger didn't look at her yet. His eyes swept the crowd, steady and unflinching, until grown men shifted uneasily under his gaze. The sheriff stepped forward, puffing his chest out. "This is town business," he barked, "and you'd do well to walk back into the hills you came from, stranger." But the mountain man, who some now whispered was named Asa Blackthorn, did not move. He did not lower his eyes. "You've marked her with your board," he said, nodding toward the crooked plank that loomed above Selena. "But no mark gives you leave to beat her like an animal." His calmness was more threatening than a shout. The crowd shifted again, whispers racing like fire. Selena's hands trembled against the wood, torn between gratitude and a new sharp fear. She knew what defiance brought in this town. Sharper punishment, deeper shame. Yet she couldn't tear her eyes from him. This man who smelled of pine and fire smoke, who now stood between her and the mob. The sheriff's jaw clenched, his authority challenged in front of the whole town. He raised his voice. "If she stands alone. That is the law." The mountain man finally turned his head, and his gaze met Selena's. It wasn't pity she saw there, nor was it scorn. It was something far more powerful. Recognition. A simple, profound acknowledgement that she still stood, though every stone had been cast. Her breath caught in her throat. For a single stunning heartbeat, the noise of the crowd, the weight of the sign, it all fell away. Then the sheriff slammed his boot against the porch step. "Enough! At dawn she will be dragged away, and if you remain, you'll join her." The people stirred, uneasy under the mountain man's steady calm. Selena gripped the post tighter, her body weak, but her spirit was burning with a new strength, as if his gaze had ignited something she thought had died. The sheriff jabbed a finger at Asa, his voice shaking with rage. "Leave this town before the sun rises, or you'll learn what it means to defy my word." But the mountain man did not move. He only stepped closer to the porch, planting his boots in the dust as if he had taken root. And with his silence, he made a promise the sheriff feared most. He would still be standing when dawn came. Sheriff Whitlock's threat hung heavier than the board above Selena's head. The square buzzed with restless murmurs, the crowd weighing the danger of the mountain man's defiance against their hunger for humiliation. Asa Blackthorn stood silent at the base of the porch, his arms folded, his broad shoulders casting a protective shadow over Selena. The sheriff prowled before them like a wolf denied its kill. "You think your silence will save her?" Whitlock snarled. "Then both of you will wear the mark." At his gesture, two deputies shouldered through the throng. They were carrying a second plank, hastily scrawled with the same jagged word. "Unclean." The black paint was still wet, dripping down the raw grain of the wood. Gasps rippled through the square. Never before had a man been branded in such a way. The sheer cruelty of it sparked a flicker of unease, even in those who had come only to laugh. The deputies raised the board high, their hammers ready. "Nail it to his back," the sheriff barked. "Let this stranger feel what it is to stand with the damned." The crowd erupted, a storm of cheers and shocked cries. Selina's stomach turned, horror pressing the breath from her chest. She clutched the porch post, whispering hoarsely, "No, leave him. This is my burden." But her voice was swallowed in the chaos. Asa lifted his head slowly, his dark eyes steady. He spoke at last, his voice deep and even, carrying over the den without strain. "I have carried heavier names than yours, Sheriff, but no man here will lay that board upon me." His words struck like iron, silencing the noise for a heartbeat before the sheriff's rage flared hotter. "Then you'll be whipped in her place," Whitlock bellowed. His deputies shifted uncertainly. The law they served had never been twisted so openly, so cruelly. The preacher at the church door turned away, unwilling to witness. His cowardice only deepened the shame that weighed upon the square. Tears blurred Selina's vision, tears she had sworn not to shed. This man owed her nothing. He had stepped into her storm, and now he was about to be broken by it. The sheriff raised his hand, signaling the deputies forward. But before they could move, Asa strode to the porch step. He stopped at Selina's side, so close she could feel the warmth of him, even through her trembling. He reached up, not to tear the board down, but to press his hand flat against the post, steadying it, steadying her. It was a silent vow. He would not be moved. The deputies faltered, glancing at each other, unwilling to be the first to test him. The sheriff's eyes burned with fury. "At sunrise, the lash will fall. All will see what comes of siding with filth." The crowd hissed, thrilled and unsettled. Whispers swirled. Would the mountain man yield? Would the girl finally collapse? Selina thought she had been alone in her shame. Yet now her strength was twined with his. The board above them no longer felt so heavy. But as the sheriff turned away, a sharp voice rose from the throng. "Why wait? Drag her out now and be done with it." The shout ignited the crowd like a spark on dry grass. Men surged forward, their voices a clashing roar. The press of bodies closed in around the porch, hot and stinking of sweat and whiskey. Hands brushed her sleeves, rough fingers tugged at her skirt. A woman's voice screeched, "Don't let her touch you. She'll carry her filth to your children." Panic rose, sharp and suffocating. Selina clawed at the porch post, clutching the splintered wood until her palms bled. Asa stepped forward, his shadow blotting out the torchlight, his voice a low thunder. "Back away!" The men nearest him stumbled as if shoved by more than words. But the sheriff barked, "Seize her! Let the town see justice!" Two men lunged, grasping Selina's arms. She cried out, but Asa was there in a blink. His hand clamped onto one man's wrist, twisting until the bone popped with a sickening crack. The man yelped in pain. Gasps ripped through the square. Silence fell, broken only by the drunkard's ugly, shrill laughter from the saloon. "See? He'll fight the whole town for her. Must be she's not so unclean after all." The taunt turned some laughter to snarls. Nothing stung pride sharper than a hint of truth. Selina's heart pounded as Asa shoved the second man back. A stone flew through the air, striking the church wall inches from her face. Dust sprayed her eyes. She blinked back tears, her arms trembling. Still, she clung to the post, refusing to fall. "Look at her," someone jeered. "She'll cling till her nails tear off." Her vision swam, her knees sagged. For the first time she felt her grip slipping. Asa glanced at her, his jaw set. His voice was low, meant only for her. "Stand, not for them, for yourself." His words were a lifeline. She drew a ragged breath, straightened her spine, though her body screamed in protest. The sheriff, red-faced, stomped onto the porch. He tore the hat from his head and flung it into the dust. "Enough!" he bellowed. "If she will not fall, we will make her crawl. At the last bell, she will be cast into the street." The people roared their approval, stamping their boots, pounding their fists against the posts. Their rage swelled into a chant. Crawl her out! Crawl her out! Selena swayed, the noise thundering in her skull. As the mob surged forward again, the post at her back shuddering under their fists, she felt the wood begin to crack. She had only moments before they tore her from it. The porch beam groaned, the word unclean shaking above Selena's head. The crowd howled, the chant rolling like thunder. Crawl her out! Crawl her out! Rough hands seized her arm, yanking so hard her shoulder burned. She cried out, her voice swallowed by the frenzy. The post splintered, sharp edges biting her palms as she clung with every last shred of strength. Asa Blackthorne moved. Enough! His voice boomed over the roar. He shoved one man back so hard he toppled into the dust. Then he planted himself squarely before Selena, his broad frame a living wall the mob could not pass. For a heartbeat the chant faltered, but Sheriff Whitlock's bark whipped them on again. She will not stand above us. Tear her down. His deputies moved in, fists clenched. Asa met them head on. His fist crashed into the first man's jaw. His shoulder slammed the second back into the seething crowd. The people shrieked with shock and a kind of wild delight. The mountain man fought not with drunken rage, but with a calm, terrifying fury. Each strike was precise. Each movement was steady. Selena sagged against the beam, her breath ragged, her knees buckling. Blood streaked her fingers. She's breaking! Someone shouted, and fresh, cruel laughter rolled through the square. Asa turned, catching her eyes. She saw no fear there, only a deep, unwavering steadiness, as if his strength were an anchor she could lean upon. Stand, Selena, he told her again, his voice low but carrying through the chaos. Their hate cannot outlast you. His words lit a spark in her chest, fragile but bright. She dragged air into her lungs, forcing her spine straight. Though the weight of the sign, the weight of their hate, threatened to crush her. The sheriff snarled, his face purple with rage. He drew his revolver. He fired a shot into the air. The crack silenced the mob in an instant. Smoke curled above the porch. Whitlock raised the pistol, leveling it at Asa. You defy my law in my town, he growled, his voice shaking. Then you'll die by it. Gas rippled through the people. This was no longer a spectacle. This was blood about to be spilled. Selena's heart lurched. She stepped away from the post, her own weakness forgotten. She clutched Asa's arm, her voice hoarse but sharp. Don't! The crowd gasped. They had not expected her to move toward the man they despised, let alone to speak in his defense. The sheriff sneered, cocking the hammer, the sound a final metallic click. You'd shield him? Then you'll fall together. The square held its breath. The first gray light of dawn was beginning to touch the rooftops. And in that cold light, Selena, swaying yet unbroken, whispered the words that turned the square colder than the gun itself. Better to fall beside him than crawl alone beneath you. The hammer of the pistol clicked back, the sound as sharp as a rattlesnake's warning. The crowd froze. Every gaze was locked on the sheriff's hand and the woman swaying beneath the board. Selena clutched Asa's arm, her body trembling, but her chin was lifted. Her words still hung in the air. Better to fall beside him than crawl alone beneath you. The defiance stung Whitlock's pride deeper than any wound. His finger tightened. Smoke burst from the barrel. The shot cracked through the square, the recoil echoing off the church walls. Selena flinched, a scream caught in her throat, but the bullet buried itself not in flesh, but in the porch beam inches above her head. Wood splintered, raining chips of wood down into her hair. Gasps tore from the crowd. For a heartbeat, it seemed the sheriff had missed. But the truth was colder. He had meant it as a warning, a promise that the next shot would not stray. Asa stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Selena and the gun. His voice was low, steady, carrying so that none could mistake his words. If you fire again, Sheriff, you will not break her. You will break this town. His calmness rattled them more than the gun. Murmurs spread. Men nodded grimly. Others whispered that Whitlock had finally gone too far. The preacher at last stepped forward, pale and shaking. Sheriff, this is the Lord's house. You cannot spill blood on its porch. Whitlock swung his pistol toward him, silencing the plea with a glare that turned the man white as chalk. "The Lord leaves this town to me," he snarled, "and I will not have my law mocked by a filthy girl and a vagrant." He jerked the barrel back toward Asa. But before his finger could close on the trigger again, a woman's voice rose, sharp and clear from the throng. "She is not unclean. You know it, Whitlock." The words struck the square like a second shot. The people turned, searching for the speaker. It was old Mrs. Tanner, wrinkled and bent, clutching a shawl about her shoulders, her eyes blazing with a fury that burned away her years. She stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at the sheriff. "You branded her because she refused you, because she would not be your bride." A roar of disbelief and shock ripped through the crowd. The mob boiled. Selena staggered, the truth slamming into her like a physical blow. The sheriff's face darkened with a terrible rage. "Lies!" he thundered, but his voice cracked. And in that crack, the crowd heard guilt. Asa's eyes narrowed, his jaw set like stone. The storm had shifted. This was no longer about Selena's shame. It was about the sheriff's corruption, laid bare for all to see. Selena's knees buckled. She clutched Asa's sleeve, but her eyes lifted, burning with a new fire. Her humiliation had not been God's decree, nor fate's curse. It had been one man's bitter, pathetic spite. The sheriff, cornered and desperate, roared, "Enough! At sunrise, she hangs with the board on her neck, and the stranger beside her." He raised the pistol again, his hand shaking. The dawn's first light spilled gold across the square, and the crowd surged, torn between obedience and outrage. Their voices rose in a tide of anger that threatened to sweep them all away. The square boiled over. Shouts clashed in the rising light. Half the crowd cried for blood, half shouted that the sheriff was a liar. The word unclean above Selena seemed to tremble with the storm of their voices. Asa stood unyielding, his frame rooted like an oak, shielding her as men shoved and cursed. The sheriff waved his pistol wildly, sweat slick on his brow. "Obey me, or you'll all hang beside her." But fear no longer chained every tongue. A rancher pushed forward, shouting, "You branded her because she spurned you, Whitlock. You call that law?" Others murmured agreement, their faces hardening as the truth sank in. Selena clung to the porch post, her body racked with exhaustion, yet her eyes were lit with fire. Humiliation had birthed defiance, and now the whole town saw it burn. The sheriff, cornered, spat with rage and leveled the pistol directly at Asa's chest. "Then I'll strike the heart of this rebellion." The trigger trembled, but before he could fire, Asa lunged. He seized Whitlock's wrist, twisting until the gun clattered to the boards. The crowd gasped, shock freezing them as the sheriff staggered back, clutching his arm. Asa's voice thundered, low but carrying over the stunned silence. "Your law is a lie, Whitlock, and lies cannot stand." The murmurs surged louder. For the first time, the sheriff's deputies faltered. One of them, a young man with fear in his eyes, slowly lowered his gun and took a half step back. The other remained, torn between loyalty and the truth. The sheriff's power was cracking. Selena, her breath ragged, stepped forward on trembling knees. She placed herself beside Asa, the shadow of the sign falling over them both. "If he kills us," she cried, her voice raw but steady, "then let all of you remember it was not for justice. It was for jealousy." The branding had been stripped bare. Shame pricked even the cruelest faces. Whitlock roared, desperate, lunging for the fallen gun. But Asa's boot pinned it flat. The mountain man's glare froze him mid-reach. The sheriff shrieked, "Seize them! Seize them now!" But his call rang hollow. A farmer shouted, "You've ruled us with fear long enough, Whitlock." A woman echoed him, lifting her child high. "We won't bow to you anymore." The roar that followed shook the square. But with that roar came a new danger. Rage is blind. The mob pressed too close, fists raised, ready to tear Whitlock apart, or turn their fury on Asa and Selena if order collapsed completely. The porch creaked. The board above swayed. Selena leaned against Asa's arm and whispered, "If they break us, they break themselves." His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. In that shared silence, she drew enough strength to lift her chin one last time. The sheriff, panting, cornered like a beast, screamed, "Then let the fire burn!" His hand shot to the knife at his belt. The blade flashed as he lunged, not at Asa, but straight at Selena. He was determined to carve his vengeance into the only flesh he still had power over. The blade flashed in the dawn, the sheriff's roar of pure hatred tearing through the square. But before steel could strike flesh, Asa moved. His arm snapped out like a striking hawk, catching Whitlock's wrist and wrenching it aside until the knife clattered to the boards. The sheriff staggered, spitting curses. The mountain man's fist crashed into his jaw. The sound of the blow silenced even the loudest mouths. Whitlock crumpled to the dust like a felled tree. The crowd gasped, stunned into absolute silence. For a long, heavy heartbeat, no one moved. The word unclean still swayed above Selena's head, a curse too heavy to lift. Then Asa bent. He gripped the fallen board, yanking it free of its nails with a sharp crack that echoed louder than the gunshot had. The plank splintered. The painted words were smeared with dust. The people watched, wide-eyed, as he cast it into the dirt where Whitlock lay groaning. Selena swayed, her body nearly spent, her palms raw and bleeding. Asa turned to her. His face was steady. His hand was outstretched. She hesitated, shame and defiance warring in her chest. Then she saw his eyes, not pity, not rescue, but recognition. Slowly, she placed her trembling hand in his. With a single fluid motion, he lifted her into his arms. It was as if the weight of her defiance was lighter than air. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the onlookers. He carries her. He claims her. The crowd parted as Asa stepped down from the porch. Each stride ground the broken board deeper into the dust beneath his boots. Each step was a final, damning judgment against the sheriff's lie. Selena pressed her face against his chest. Tears burned her eyes, not from weakness, but from release. The burden she had borne alone had at last been shared. The sun broke free of the horizon, golden light spilling across the square. And in that glorious glow, the word painted to condemn her seemed to vanish, replaced by the image of her, carried high in the arms of a man who had chosen not with law or coin, but with simple, undeniable truth. The mob, their fury drained, melted back in silence. Some had shame heavy on their faces. Others had awe. "She stood all night," a woman whispered. Another answered softly, "And he saw her." The preacher, pale and shaken, bowed his head, unwilling to meet her gaze. He knew his silence had been as cruel as the sheriff's lies. Asa carried her across the square, past the fallen pistol, past the shattered board, past the faces that had spat and jeered. He did not stop until he reached the far steps, where the road opened wide toward the hills. There, with the sun burning bright behind him, he set her on her feet again, steadying her until her legs held firm. Selena lifted her head. Her eyes met the crowd one last time. Her body trembled, but her voice rose clear and strong. "You called me unclean," she said, "but I stood, and he carried me when I could not." Her words struck deeper than any blow. In that final silence, the weight of their own cruelty pressed down upon them all. Asa placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and sure. Together they turned away from the square. Their shadows stretched long in the rising light, leaving behind a town that would never forget the day the sheriff's board broke and the branded girl walked free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice from the forgotten corners of the past. When the mountain man stood against the whole town, would you have stood with him? Let us know in the comments below.